but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the live desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 9:30 on Friday the 1st of September, and this is Britain's Newsroom here on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, and Ellie Costello.
Coming up for you today, back to school chaos. Thousands of pupils are forced back into lockdown-style learning as crumbling buildings and classrooms are closed across the country.
And shuffling the deck chairs. What's the fallout from Rishi Sunak's ministerial mix-around? Could it be a key to turning around his ailing poll ratings?
Stranded abroad and then stranded once you get home. Fresh train strikes cause misery across the UK, bringing Britain to a standstill.
A strike too far? It's not just the trains, the planes, it's the NHS too. Despite those waiting times being at a record high, for the first time, junior doctors and consultants will walk out together in a joint historic strike. Could this put patients at risk?
It's a packed show today, but alongside all of that, the most exciting pictures ever of the Loch Ness Monster have been released. Does Nessie exist? We're going to be talking about that. Let us know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.com.
Exciting
but
pictures.
First, let's get the news bulletin with Rhiannon. Have an open mind, Tom.
Absolutely not.
Thank you, Ellie. Good morning. It's 9:32. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The government's being urged to publicly reveal which schools are affected by a type of concrete prone to sudden collapse. Thousands of children face disruption ahead of their return to class after safety warnings were issued, forcing the immediate closure of some buildings. More than 100 schools, nurseries and colleges have had to make urgent relocation plans, and some children may be forced back into remote learning. Another wave of strikes hits rail passengers today, bringing some services across the country to a standstill. Members of the ASLEF union are staging a 24-hour walkout, leaving many trains without drivers. The rail delivery group describes the strike as unnecessary, but ASLEF says the government's refusing to make a reasonable pay offer. Meanwhile, the Transport Secretary is meeting aviation chiefs today as thousands of passengers remain stranded abroad. Services to and from the UK were restricted for hours on Monday following an air traffic control glitch. More than a quarter of flights were cancelled, causing a backlog that's lasted several days. An inquiry into what happened is due on Monday. And house prices fell in August at the sharpest annual rate in 14 years, according to Nationwide. The banking giant says annual house prices fell by 5.3% last month, bringing the average property value to £259,000. It's the biggest annual drop since July 2009. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now it's back to Tom and Ellie.
Welcome back. You're watching Britain's Newsroom. The time is 9:33 and I'm here with Tom Harwood. We are talking today, our biggest story is about thousands of pupils potentially returning to homeschooling. Why? Because of concrete safety fears in the classroom up and down Britain. It's concern that 104 schools could be affected by this, meaning that those pupils, after 6 long weeks away from the classroom, are back to lockdown-style learning, online lessons. And I know that's really affected so many of you at home. Potentially you could be a grandparent or a parent of these children. Do let us know how you're feeling. It must be really, really quite concerning for you. It must be a scramble, actually, potentially trying to get childcare for Monday. Do let us know what you're thinking at the moment. gbnews@gbnews.com. It really is quite an astonishing situation.
It is, and there are huge questions about why is this only being announced now? At what point did we start to learn about the dangers within this RAAC concrete? When did individuals in positions of authority know that this was an issue? And why has it only been announced days before people are returning to school? Some huge questions for ministers and indeed administrators, local councils no doubt too. But ministers have been urged to provide more clarity on the scale of this problem. And the Welsh Government says it will also survey its own schools to see if they're safe. Because remember, the 104 schools, that's just in England.
Yes, there are so many questions. So joining us now to discuss it is political commentator John Oxley. Good morning to you, John. Really good to have you with us in the studio. I mean, for these parents of these students, and certainly for the students themselves, it's going to feel like a return to 2020, isn't it?
Absolutely. These schools, many of them are forced to either close down or close down certain areas, and that's going to be a huge upheaval, particularly for children potentially starting school as well, who don't even know if they're going into their new school that they were getting all excited about. Instead, they're going to be at home. Their parents are going to have to find ways to deal with that. And we also have to remember, as we saw in lockdown, there's lots of economically poorer areas where this is a huge problem because they don't necessarily have laptops at home, they don't necessarily have good internet access. So it's a huge problem for them to have to learn online. And for this to happen with a week or two's notice, and with the government saying that money for finding new accommodation and new transport is going to have to come out of schools' budgets, it's a big imposition. We already know schools are struggling with all sorts of budget issues.
And we know that as a result of all of these strikes, a lot of pay rises have come out of, in many cases, the capital budgets of not just schools, but also hospitals and everything else. If we're spending less on the infrastructure to pay for higher salaries, that points to bigger issues down the road as well.
Absolutely. I mean, in any business, if you were moving money from your capital expenditure into running day-to-day operations, that's a big alarm bell that you're not in a good financial position. And I think that's what we're finding at the moment with a lot of public services. And we've seen, we see it all the time through the era of austerity, that big infrastructure projects were cancelled, money was moved into day-to-day spending, and that ends up costing you more in the long run. And then when you need to fix something like this, you've got to scrabble around to find money that you don't necessarily have.
We've just had a 6-week-long holiday, longer if it's a private school. How have parents only just been told that this is an issue? I mean, many of them going back to school on Monday.
Absolutely. I mean, it's remarkable. I think I was reading that an engineer first warned about this in 1995, and we know that this concrete, when it was rolled out, had a life expectancy of about 30 years, and these schools were mostly built in the 50s and the 60s. And, you know, this has been an issue where it has been discovered on an ad hoc basis with issues in particular schools over the last 4 or 5 years. So it's really bad of the government to have not investigated this properly. And never mind the 6-week closure, we had a period you've already talked about where schools were largely closed for 2 years. All sorts of engineering work could have been done in that period when children weren't there to begin with. And it's frankly shocking that with a week to go, parents are being told, oh no, your child's not going back to school, we're going to have to make alternative arrangements.
What a missed opportunity, and particularly you were mentioning, in many cases, the children that suffered most from school closures during lockdown are from less economically advantageous areas. It seems likely to me that a lot of these 50s and 60s school buildings that were built with this aerated concrete, built fairly quite cheaply, are going to be in similar areas that have already seen the biggest knocks from those lockdowns over the last 2 years.
That's very true. You know, these schools generally will have been where new towns or new estates were built in the 50s and the 60s, and they built a school alongside them, generally done quite cheaply. A lot of that was, you know, recovering from blitz damage in the inner cities or the slum clearances that happened in these new council estates. So, yeah, there's a big chance that these are going to be schools in not particularly rich inner city areas or suburban areas, without much money, rather than your sort of old village school where potentially people are a bit more affluent.
This isn't going to be a quick fix, is it, John? I mean, if we're talking about buildings potentially needing to be rebuilt and students being moved into mountable blocks, I mean, that could take a year, potentially 2.
Yeah, it's a huge problem, partly because they'll have to find the funding to do it, which isn't easy in government circles. Then there'll be all sorts of preliminary work to work out what schools need fixing, what the best fix for any individual thing is. You know, potentially this is going to be a situation, as you say, for a couple of years, which is really hard and really expensive to find a solution to.
It's just extraordinary. I mean, first the alarm bells were raised in 1995. That's the best part of 30 years ago. It's extraordinary that in the intervening period, not a single government, not a single minister or indeed local authority has woken to the sort of scale of this issue. Why is it all coming to a head now?
I mean, sadly, this is quite typical of what our government does, that there's a lot of focus on day-to-day issues and not much on long-term planning. And you know, it's more than a 1995 issue. These buildings were built in the 1950s and 60s when the state didn't have a huge amount of money. And so they were like, we'll have this cheap solution. It will last for 30 or 40 years. By then, we'll be in a position to deal with it. And for whatever reason, 30 or 40 years later, governments looked at these schools and thought, well, they're doing fine now. Do we really want to spend more money upgrading them or rebuilding them? And as you say, another 30 or 40 years have passed, and these buildings with a 30-year lifespan are now at 80 years old. And you know, that's clear for anyone to have seen, but no one's really bothered to look into it or bothered to solve the problem. And it's a shocking dereliction and really quite indicative of how we deal with long-term problems in a lot of issues across government.
John, whilst we've got you, I wanted to ask you about the mini reshuffle that we saw yesterday, the biggest move being Grant Shapps now in defence. What do you make of that move?
I think it's an interesting one for Rishi Sunak to have made. You know, Grant Shapps, one thing he brings to the government is he's a good media performer. There's someone they want to get out to the fore in the run-up to the election. But also, I think, with defence in particular, you kind of have two types of defence secretary. Ben Wallace was one who was, you know, had served in the armed forces, really cared about the armed forces, and really saw his role as defence secretary as the guy to defend them from government cuts. I think Grant Shapps is kind of the opposite. He's very close with Rishi, very aligned politically with him, and so probably when the next spending review comes around, he's not someone who's going to be putting up much of a fight, as we fully expect that defence is going to be looking at having its its budget trimmed.
Potentially a bit of a political containment strategy there, shutting down shouts or rows to come in the future. But it does leave a bit of an energy-sized hole in government. We've got a very new minister in Claire Coutinho who only became an MP in 2019, a rapid rise to cabinet secretary. But it does mean that we have yet another change in energy security strategy.
Absolutely, and that's, again, one of the problems that we've seen across all sorts of departments, that it's become these revolving doors. It's hard to get anything done. You inherit a set of policies that you're not necessarily really passionate about, but you don't necessarily have the time to bring in your own ideas. And I think that disruption is never good for exactly the sort of long-term planning that we've been talking about. And energy security is a long-term thing. You know, like this issue with schools, if you're building a power station, it takes you 20 or 30 years. You really need someone with that long-term vision, and that's not helped by chopping and changing ministers.
It all ties together, doesn't it? The lack of long-term thinking in schools, the lack of long-term thinking in energy. John Oxley, thank you so much for talking us through those big stories this morning.
Yeah, really good to see you. Thank you very much.
Well, following the travel chaos this week, many Brits are struggling to get back home.
Yes, stranded holidaymakers face disruption and stress, and they've been forced to foot the bill from no fault of their own.
Well, one such Brit is Richard, whose 30th wedding anniversary took a turn for the worse when he and his wife faced delays on their flight back from Madeira.
Well, Richard joins us now. Good morning to you, Richard. It looks as though you're still very much in Madeira. Tell us your story.
Yeah, just as we went on from the other day, we were over here for a 30th wedding anniversary. Should have been flying back on the 28th, and EasyJet cancelled the flight back, obviously through the air traffic control fiasco, and now, yeah, we're still here.
And how are you and your wife holding up? Because you're there on a really special occasion. You're celebrating your 30th wedding anniversary, and it sounds as though it's just turned into chaos.
Oh, it has, yeah, full chaos. No contact from EasyJet, just telling us, well, being dictated to when we can get back home. We do fly home now tomorrow, so homeward bound in the morning. Looking forward to my full English breakfast when I get back.
Well, Richard, how easy was it for you to sort out that flight back? I mean, I suppose a sigh of relief that you do now have a flight secured, but I suppose that was a long time in limbo. Were the companies that you were talking to any help at all?
Really. EasyJet, I spoke to them. They sent me an email out 2 nights ago. Please give us a ring in the morning. We've got some flights going back, first come, first served basis. So I was on the blower to them, and I was on there for about an hour and 30 minutes. We got to the crunch where they were offering me 2 flights to fly back yesterday. And just as they said they've got 2 flights for me, the line cut off. And then it took me an hour to get back in touch with them.
So, Richard, have you been able to enjoy the extended stay at all and enjoy the sunshine and the good food, or has it really ruined the trip for you?
To a certain degree, it's been stressful, but we've tried to make the best of it, should we say.
And what's the situation once you get home? Because we're about to talk to our next guest about train strikes, because you could be facing that once you land, couldn't you?
Yeah, we should have been flying into Manchester, which obviously we're from Stoke, so it's nice and easy. But now they've got us flying into Gatwick, and there's train strikes on tomorrow.
Yeah.
So it's all fun at the fair.
So what's the current situation? Have you checked out what you can do from Gatwick, what your options may be, or could you just be on a very delayed service?
Supposedly they're putting a coach on for us, but I don't really fancy a 4-hour journey from here, a 3-hour journey up to Stoke. So I'm going to get one of the family members come pick us up, I think.
Oh, well, Richard,
yeah.
Best of luck to you tomorrow. We'll be thinking of you. Hopefully it all runs smoothly for you. Let's hope that plane takes off, and let's hope you get yourself a train as well.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much.
Yeah. No, I suppose you can think sometimes, oh, another extra couple of days on holiday, how lovely, the sunshine, the food. But I suppose the stress of it all, not knowing, number one, is the insurance going to cover it? Are the companies going to cover it? When are you actually going to get going? You might have commitments back home in the UK. And, of course, not knowing which airport you're going to end up in.
It's very true, actually. You've got a very sensible outlook, Tom. There's me just saying I'd enjoy the extra sunshine. But you're right, it's the additional expense, it's the stress.
Remind me not to go on holiday with you. You know, you're sitting there telling yourself, I'll be on the phone, stressing, trying to get things sorted out.
But the reality is it has been very, very difficult and very, very stressful for lots and lots of people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, let's get more on the whole travel situation now with the travel analyst Sally Gethin for top tips on how to handle what seems to be a very chaotic summer in terms of travel.
Yeah.
Sally, it's extraordinary. Just talking to Richard there, his flight's obviously delayed due to that glitch. And now the train strikes too. This is going to affect many, many, many people across the country.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was only a week ago, I think, we were talking about travel, the bank holiday, and that was a bit uncertain here and there. And now, you know, it's like a week is a long time in politics, certainly as in air travel, right?
Yeah.
I mean, who could have imagined that outage would have almost brought the whole air traffic system to a screeching halt? I just want to say with Richard that I have been in touch with EasyJet, and they are this policy of, you know, contacting customers who are stranded on a first-come, first-served basis. That's how they're doing it, but they've laid on extra flights. They're taking larger aircraft to their existing, you know, to destinations, and BA has also put on extra flights. So they've really battled with a situation which wasn't beyond their control. And just quickly also on that ATC thing, there is supposed to be a preliminary report of an investigation of sorts being presented to the Transport Secretary on Monday. Now, some airlines aren't happy with that, and Johan Lundgren, the CEO of EasyJet, is calling for an independent review and actually saying, well, you know what, there needs to be closer scrutiny of that. They need to take on more staff. It's not acceptable that this happened, mustn't happen again, because airlines foot the bill. And also, they're in the firing line, really. They're the buffer, you know, that take the impact when this... well, passengers are, but in between them and this air traffic system are the airlines. And so, yeah, lots of questions.
And to reiterate, this entire problem began because one airline filled out a form incorrectly and then it forced everything to go manual?
Well, we don't know, absolutely. I mean, one news outlet reported that. I haven't seen it corroborated. It looks that way from the official statement from NATS that it was an external input going into their system. But then to cope with that, because obviously the worst case scenario would be a collision in the air. We don't want that to happen at all. So what they did was, what happened was their primary and secondary backup systems automatically suspended. Now, how can that happen? They're actually supposed to kick in and compensate, right? So we need to find out. And they're saying, NATS, and, you know, they're actually half-owned almost, the golden share is by the government. So that's why people are sceptical, airlines are sceptical. Is this going to be a genuine report that comes out on Monday? We need an independent one. And also it's supposed to be a preliminary one. They've said, oh, we'll make the results public. But there's no timeline for that. So, yeah, a lot of questions. But it doesn't help people, obviously, stranded. Although I spoke to the head of ABTA, which represents travel agents, yesterday, and he was saying that in some strange situations, especially, you know, if you're retired, no reason to come back to the UK, some people have actually enjoyed the extra time at their, you know, in some cases. I'm not saying that, I know that could be in poor taste if you really are stuck, but...
Yeah, well, it depends on your situation, doesn't it? I mean, I know somebody just anecdotally who couldn't fly back from, I can't remember where he was, but anyway, let's say Spain. He's gone on a European tour. He's got loads of annual leave, and he just thought, I'm just going to disappear for a couple of weeks. I mean, but that is the exception to the rule, I suppose. Most people are in a situation, as we just heard from Richard, where it's very, very stressful, and they've taken on that additional expense. So is that something they will be able to get back from the airlines? What's the situation?
Yeah, so let's come to that. So it depends how you've booked your trip. So if you self-packaged, did it yourself, paid for bits and bobs, right, you're really exposed to risk. So say your car hire might have had to cancel, you may not get that back, your accommodation. If you booked with a tour operator, you're well covered. And like I said, I spoke to the Association for British Travel Agents, and they've said that they've had good responses from their members, and that those companies also, they offer you a totally new travel package if it's had to be cancelled and you haven't yet embarked on it. But of course, for families, this would have been their last chance saloon right before the new school term. Whatever's going to happen with that now, I don't know.
If there is a school term.
Right, well, actually, where do we end? You know, it's. But anyway, yeah, with airlines, you are due a refund if. You know, you choose not to be rerouted or rebooked. But once you take the rebooking...
Then you lose your refund.
Then you lose the refund. And in this case, it's very unlikely you'll get any particular compensation on top because airlines weren't... You know, it was well beyond their control. But, yeah, so make sure you... However difficult it is, even if your mobile phone does get cut off or their systems get cut off, stay in touch with the airline, because if you just go off rebooking stuff yourself, just check in with your airline to make sure that you will get that covered. Just keep all receipts and don't go berserk like, you know, some luxury hotel as a backup plan, you know.
No, you will be on the hook.
Keep it sensible.
A quick word on trains.
Oh, yes,
because, of course, this is all tying in together, and no doubt a lot of people trying to get to and from airports will be having a lot of stickiness as well.
And Gatwick Express and Heathrow Express. So today there's no Gatwick Express, and Heathrow Express is affected as well. It's... so it's reduced today. It's supposed to be normal tomorrow, when I last checked. And then, but of course, we have the main rail network system in England badly affected. So today is the ASLEF, which is the drivers striking. So no drivers, right? No trains, basically. And then tomorrow they're on a sort of no overtime withdrawal of their hours. So there's a knock-on effect. But then RMT kicks in tomorrow. That's all the rail workers as a whole, and they're forming picket lines today. And also, you'll probably be aware that there's a big deadline with ticket office closures with their consultation too. But anyway, with trains, you really need to check individually with your train operator because, you know, I've been looking at this and it's a patchy situation. It's not like all trains are suspended across the entire network. It varies from each operator.
And if anything, that's more annoying. Sometimes false hope and thinking, rather than it just all being gone, bits and bobs being open and not, that can be the most irritating for passengers.
Yes, I know, and you have to be a bit plucky, really, to take that risk, don't you? Even if it looks on paper or digitally, yeah, you can make your journey because they're interconnected, the rail system, and you could easily be impacted by another rail operator. It's kind of very patchy and complex.
Yeah, well, Sally Gethin, we always seem to bombard you with questions. You've always got the answers. Thank you so much. Really good to see you.
OK.
Yeah.
Best of luck if you're heading out on the rails.
It does make me think, if Elon Musk can get his cars to drive by themselves without a driver, you'd think that a train on tracks going from A to B, why do they need drivers these days, honestly?
Wow. The drivers might have something to say about that, Tom. Do stay with us. We're going to be asking Ben Habib and the Asylum Rights Director at Amnesty International if they think students should make way for migrants. You won't want to miss that.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Morning, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. A bit misty and murky out there. Some places will stay fairly drab all day. A few will see a bit of sunshine and some places will see some showers. It's a bit of a mishmash, as you might imagine. This zone across central areas, so from the Midlands, northern England into southern Scotland, staying drab, some rain and drizzle at times, particularly to the east of the Pennines. Further south, brighter spells, a bit of sunshine coming through, but equally a sprinkling of showers over the Midlands, Wales and southern England this afternoon. Much of northern Scotland, again, set fair, dry and fine. Bit of a chilly start this morning, but by this afternoon we'll be up to 20 Celsius, 22 or 23 across the south. Feels a lot cooler in this cloudier zone over northern England and Northern Ireland, and still some rain and drizzle here this evening. Any showers scattered about further south this evening will fade away, so many will have a dry night with clear spells, turning a bit chilly once more across northern Scotland, well down into single figures here. Some towns and cities in the south staying in the teens. On to Saturday, and for many, it's a fine day. Could again start with some mist and fog tomorrow morning, but that should clear away. There'll be some cloud bubbling up and one or two scattered showers, but the vast majority will have a fine day tomorrow with some lengthy spells of sunshine. The sunshine likely to turn fairly hazy in the far
far north with maybe some rain pushing in here later, but mostly dry and bright with sunny spells, feeling a bit warmer, and for most of us it's going to be a fine day on Sunday too.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 10 a.m. on Friday, the 1st of September. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Tom Howard and me, Ellie Costello. Coming up for you today.
Back to school chaos. Thousands of pupils forced back into lockdown-style lessons, and parents left in limbo as crumbling, unsafe classrooms are closed across the country.
Does the installation of Sunak yes man Grant Shapps mean there'll be less money for Britain's defence?
Stranded abroad and then stranded once you get home. Fresh train strikes cause misery across the UK, bringing Britain to a standstill.
A strike too far. Despite NHS waiting times being at a record high, junior doctors and consultants will walk out together in a historic joint strike. Could this put patients' lives at risk?
And of course, we love hearing what you have to think on all the stories of today. Particularly, do get in touch if you have a view or are affected by the lockdown-style stay-at-home orders some students are receiving across the country today with these crumbling schools and aerated concrete.
Yeah, are you a parent left in limbo? Let us know, gbnews@gbnews.com. But first, let's get a news bulletin with Rhiannon.
Ellie, thank you. Good morning. It's coming up to 2 minutes past 10. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The government's being urged to publicly reveal which schools are affected by a particular kind of concrete that's prone to sudden collapse. Thousands of children face disruption ahead of their return to class after safety warnings were issued, forcing the immediate closure of some buildings. More than 100 schools, nurseries and colleges have had to make urgent relocation plans, and some children may be forced back into remote learning. Schools Minister Nick Gibb told GB News the government's prioritising safety.
We took this decision as swiftly as we could. We had to look at the evidence, we had to discuss that evidence with experts, we had to make sure we had plans in place for what schools would be doing when they were told that they probably needed to address this, what was previously regarded as low-risk RAC in their schools. But it's the right decision, it's the most cautious decision.
Shadow Justice Secretary Steve Reed told us more should have been done.
If they'd put the measures in place at the beginning of the summer holidays, parents wouldn't be finding out now, just days before the start of the school term, that their child has not got a school to go to. And if you just imagine how exhausted parents are after the long summer holidays, after all the disruption of the pandemic, after all of the disruption of the strikes that the government refused to intervene in to help sort out as well. Now more disruption with just days of notice when the government could have done something at the beginning of the summer that they didn't. It is neglect and it is incompetence on the part of the government.
Another wave of strikes hits rail passengers today, bringing services across the country to a standstill. Members of the ASLEF union are staging a 24-hour walkout, leaving many trains without drivers. The rail delivery group describes the strike as unnecessary, but the union says the government's refusing to make a reasonable pay offer. The dispute, which started over a year ago, remains at deadlock, with no talks planned and no sign of a breakthrough. General Secretary of ASLEF, Mick Whelan, says they'll keep striking until a reasonable pay offer is made.
The reality is that we haven't seen the Transport Minister since last December. We haven't seen the Rail Minister since the Act of Bad Faith in January, and we haven't seen the RDG since the deal they put to us with our red lines in that they set up to fail in April. We've been here now for the best part of 14 months. If it takes another 14 months or another 14 years, we'll still be here. And at some point, somebody's going to have to come and talk to us and resolve this situation.
Two former leaders of far-right group the Proud Boys have been jailed on charges relating to the storming of the US Capitol building in Washington. Joseph Biggs and Zachary Rell were convicted of seditious conspiracy for trying to overturn Donald Trump's 2020 election defeat. Their prison terms of 15 and 17 years are below US sentencing guidelines and far lower than the 30-year term sought by federal prosecutors. Both broke down crying, with Rell saying he let politics consume his life and lost track of who and what matters. Back here, house prices fell in August at the sharpest annual rate in 14 years, according to Nationwide. The banking giant says annual house prices fell by 5.3% last month, bringing the average property value to £259,000. It's the biggest annual drop since July 2009. Direct Line will pay £30 million in compensation to customers who've been overcharged whilst renewing their insurance. The company admitted to an error in implementing new pricing rules, which came into effect at the start of last year. The Financial Conduct Authority brought in the new rules to protect existing customers from being quoted higher prices than new customers. Changes to vaccine programmes will make it easier for people to get protected, ultimately saving lives. That's according to the NHS. Almost 1 million more people will now be eligible for a shingles vaccine. The HPV jab offered to children in a bid to eliminate cervical cancer will go from 2 doses to 1. The changes will start on the 11th of September. And Fergus, Jocelyn and Debbie, just some of the storms we might expect next season. The Met Office says they're being named after the very people working to protect us from them. Meteorologists name storms only when they're expected to have a medium or high impact on people. Forecasters say it helps communicate the seriousness of a storm. It'll be the first time the traditional male and female ordering of names will be altered. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by simply saying play GB News. Now it's back over to Tom and Ellie.
Good morning, welcome back. You're watching Britain's Newsroom with me and Tom Harwood. The time is 7 minutes past 10, and our top story today that we are talking about is this potential lockdown return to some schools. They will be shut over fears of them suddenly collapsing because of the type of concrete that was used to build them. So there is this last-minute scramble for many students and their parents to head back really to lockdown learning and learning at home online.
A lot of these schools were built very quickly in the 1950s and 1960s using a type of concrete known as aerated concrete. It was only meant to last 30 years, and here we are 70 years later, these buildings still standing and now deemed too dangerous in many cases for any children to go inside them. But you've been getting in touch on this issue, and I have to say it hasn't been a united inbox this morning. Craig has written in to say, stop the rubbish. I have worked with concrete all my working life, and concrete doesn't suddenly collapse at all.
But Craig, I suppose you'd say to that you probably couldn't risk it, could you?
And also, have you been working with aerated concrete, this special type of cheapo concrete that has been deemed to be a bigger risk?
Yeah, do let us know, Craig. Helen says there are loads of vacant office buildings currently in the UK, lots of people working from home, of course. Rent the office space and use them as classrooms. Job done and sorted whilst the building work takes place. Because that is a very good point, Helen, because this could take a very long time. If these buildings need to be rebuilt, that could take years, couldn't it?
Although I wonder if where the schools are is precisely the same place as where the office buildings are. It might be a bit of a commute for students to get to school.
And there's no trains running?
There are no trains. Nothing's working. Susan has written in to say the government is utterly useless. It's beyond them to contact... Is it beyond them to contact every local authority affected to identify every empty village hall, community centre, empty office and council meeting rooms that could be repurposed as temporary classrooms? Good suggestions there.
Yeah, and Julie says, in my hometown of Burnley, the schools have been rebuilt and consolidated during the Conservative government term. A lot of money has gone into levelling up, so it is a question now of available funds. Not all of these schools can be rebuilt at once.
Yeah, this is affecting, of course, 105 schools in England. So there are many, many schools where this is not affecting them, but of course, thousands and thousands of students that could see that dreaded return to online learning.
Yeah, and if it affects you, please let us know. gbviews@gbnews.com. And just a quick word on Nessie, because we have been talking about the Loch Ness Monster this morning. The most exciting photos ever released, we're being told. This is taken by a photographer called Che Kelly. She's 51. She actually took these photographs. I think we've got a picture of them, which we can show you, back in 2018. Now, this does look like the real deal to me, to be honest. It looks like a crocodile or something.
To me, it looks like a couple of rocks.
No. Now, she says she truly believes that there is something in Loch Ness. She says, what I saw looked like a serpent. It was definitely a creature, and it was definitely moving. It was a very strange movement. She said, it is not driftwood. It is absolutely a strange creature.
Isn't it remarkable that everyone who says they can see this serpent that's moving, they can never produce video evidence? In fact, the number of sightings of Nessie seem to have fallen precipitously just as the rise of smartphones and everyone having a mobile video recording device on them has risen. I don't think that's a coincidence.
Well, I don't know. I feel like this... Well, she's describing it as bombshell evidence. And apparently there has been local hunters there last weekend and they have video evidence.
Well,
that could change your mind,
Well,
Tom.
perhaps they should show me that video because I'm not buying it.
Potentially. Well, let me just share this with you from Marion, who is from Inverness, born and bred. She saw Nessie.
Oh, did she?
On the shore
really?
at Fort Augustus Abbey in the late 1970s. She saw it. She then gave her account to Japanese and German television companies. I saw a crocodile with scaly skin. Now, put up this photo again of our lovely photographer, Che Kelly. Is that not a crocodile with scaly skin? It's exactly the same.
And for those listening on the radio, it's a couple of rocks in the water.
No,
it's not a monster.
It's a crocodile.
It's not real.
It's exactly the same.
It's a waste of time. It's a silly season story. We may be in the 1st of September, but this is still an August story.
No. I'm telling you, it's all coming together now. You're going to get your video evidence and you'll be on my side.
I have a feeling the inbox will be on my side. I think GB News viewers and listeners are rational to the core and don't believe in fairies at the bottom of gardens.
Well, look, it interests the Japanese and the German television companies. So
it's great PR for Scotland, of course.
Do let us know what you think of that story. It's definitely got us talking in the newsroom, hasn't it? gbviews@gbnews.com. Now,
some more serious news.
Let's do that, shall we? Yesterday, the Prime Minister had a minor reshuffle of his cabinet following the expected resignation of Defence Secretary Ben Wallace. In his resignation letter, Ben Wallace emphasised the increase in defence spending that occurred during his tenure, as well as the challenges that Britain has faced, including Afghanistan, Ukraine and Sudan.
Well, the new Defence Secretary is Grant Shapps, who's previously, of course, was the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero. But this is Grant Shapps' 5th cabinet ministerial job within just 1 year. Do you remember the 3 days he was Home Secretary? Yes. Well, he's replaced at Desnes by Claire Coutinho, a close ally of the Prime Minister, who's only been an MP since 2019. She's the 6th holder of the energy portfolio since 2020. It's all getting fairly messy. But a wider reshuffle is expected later this year.
There's lots to go through, isn't there? Well, joining us now to discuss the latest change at the Ministry of Defence is former Deputy Chief of Defence Staff, Lieutenant General Sir Simon Mayle. Really good to see you this morning, sir.
Morning, Tom.
What do you make, then, of Grant Shapps in at Defence?
Well, I think I could say, and I'm at liberty since I'm retired, to say I don't think under any military professional's judgment Grant Shapps would have been anybody's first choice. We're at the tail end of a government, or certainly before election. We're in the middle of a big crisis in Ukraine. We're always talking about the rising challenge of China. We are very keen to sustain our credibility with the Americans. We're still pushing through elements of the Integrated Defence Review, including cuts. And I think most people within defence would have liked somebody who had an instinct for defence, understood the language. I'm not saying Grant Shapps doesn't know the difference between a platoon and an aircraft carrier, but credibility counts. So he inherits a big portfolio at a very interesting time. And all the rhetoric is how important defence is, the security threats to the country, etc. And then you bring a relative novice in, and I would rather somebody with a diplomacy, obviously defence or security background, foreign policy background, because the military are very much part of your foreign policy and your diplomatic and your prosperity agendas.
It is fascinating, though. Ben Wallace had such respect from not just across the political aisle in the United Kingdom, but really around the world. Is it a bit of bitterness, perhaps, that his resignation comes after he was snubbed for that NATO Secretary-General role?
I'm sure it is. I mean, I couldn't speak for him, obviously. I think it was a great disappointment. And I think the reality was that we had a Defence Secretary at that stage with a genuine credibility to be put forward to be the political head of, one of the most successful security alliances in the world, NATO. And there were a number of reasons, obviously, well trailed in the press why he didn't get it. But he was of that calibre that you could put him forward, and we could all say that is somebody. There are all sorts of reasons why he didn't get it. I'm sure other people's internal politics. But as I say, we're going to send Grant Shapps in, ably supported, of course, by the Chief of Defence Staff, the chiefs, the permanent Undersecretary, into NATO conferences and across the Atlantic.
Given you say all of that infrastructure there, the Chief of the Defence Staff and all the rest of it, there is that infrastructure to support. Does it matter that Grant Shapps doesn't have a military background, therefore? If he's going to be sort of a manager rather than a soldier, sometimes it's useful to have, for example, a health secretary who's not a doctor who's not sort of viewing themselves.
Yeah, you're
from
not
that
beholden.
perspective.
I get that. There is Stockholm syndrome. There often is with the military. We're a very attractive, excellent, ministry to look after, and soldiers, sailors, airmen, and women. They're very, very commendable people, and defence secretaries do go out and meet our wonderful, soldiers and servicemen and women. But the important thing is, I hope he's got enough self-awareness, and I'm sure he does. He's a good front man for the government. I know he's very, very slick on television and radio. The problem is, once you start to get below the surface, just how much credibility have you got on really serious issues, which are life and death for individuals and for national agendas. But equally, he's a friend of the Prime Minister. He could, if I was making a suggestion to him, say, I'll keep defence off the domestic political radar screen. It's clearly again with the international side when we talk Ukraine. What about stopping the final set of cuts to the army, manpower cuts, because it does seem a bit counterintuitive to be going on about how dangerous the world is and continue to make cuts in the manpower.
Well, if we cast our mind back to the Tory leadership race, Grant Shapps at the time actually spoke about defence spending and he wanted it raised to 3%. Now, Sunak has promised to keep it at 2.5%.
Or get to 2.5%.
Or get to 2.5%.
If only it was 2.5.
Yes. Does that give you hope that at least he would follow it in Ben Wallace's footsteps in that sense of wanting to get up the defence spending?
Yes, and I think, I don't say Rishi Sunak doesn't support that. We do know the public finances are not in a good shape. The Treasury will always be bearing down. We have procurement issues that I think, the Ministry of Defence must take their own fair share of the blame over. But if Grant Shapps is at least aspirational and has the support of the Prime Minister, that is an ambition we should be aiming for, that is a good message for defence, that although he's not a defence or foreign policy expert, he does understand within the ambition of the national ambition and our relationships with other countries, that a well-funded defence, the money properly used, of course, is something that would be good for him, good for the party to espouse, and good for him as a defence secretary to go for within realism.
There is, of course, the accusation that the only reason he's been placed in there is because he's such a close ally of the Prime Minister, is because he'll put defence back in its box. He won't be an issue. He won't be making arguments around the cabinet table to sort of drag yet more money into the defence budget. Are people in the defence world worried about that?
I think even under Ben Wallace we were having worries, because I think at the moment, we are, I would say, underfunded. I always say we don't always use our money as well as we could do with big defence procurement. But there will be a feeling that he is Rishi Sunak's man. And that's either good for defence or it could be bad for defence in the case that he actually has his own political objectives that don't sort of correlate with being a defender of the Ministry of Defence and the servicemen and women that it represents, and we send out to do the business on behalf of the government and the nation.
Lieutenant General Sir Simon Mayle, really good to see you this morning. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Yeah. No, really, really interesting there in terms of the implications for the decision. What is going on in Rishi Sunak's mind in terms of why he's making these very particular little moves?
And Grant Shapps is golden boy, it would seem, in the Cabinet.
Very, very close. I mean, as soon as he dropped out of the leadership race, he was the guy that helped introduce Rishi Sunak at his leadership launch. He's been very close to Rishi Sunak throughout the whole time that he's been Prime Minister, and indeed before. And who could forget his heady 3 days as Home Secretary in the final days of the Liz Truss ministry.
Tom's very upset that it was his day off yesterday and he actually missed this mini reshuffle.
I did. Normally I'd be standing on Downing Street, and yesterday I was just at home.
I did think of you. Do let us know what you make of that mini reshuffle. One expected later on in the year as well. Who would you like to see in significant roles? Do let us know. gbviews@gbnews.com.
Well, with the average cost of a new school uniform now at around £200 to £300, many families will be struggling to afford shop prices this September. Well, in order to try and help parents who might be struggling, uniform banks have been set up all over the UK.
Well, our Northwest of England reporter Sophie Reaper is in Rochdale now and shares with us what kind of impact this is having. Sophie, good morning to you. Tell us more.
Good morning to you both. Yeah, you said it there, Tom, £200 to £300 now, the average school uniform. And the cost of living crisis is just making everything even harder for families all over the UK. I'm at this one here in Rochdale this morning, where last year they gave out over 7,000 items of school uniforms. So to tell us more, joining me now is Julie. Good morning to you, Julie.
Thank you.
Tell me about what you do at this food bank, uniform bank, sorry, Uniforms for All.
Yes, thank you. This is us. If we have got it, you can have it. We have a Facebook page and requests come in on there. If we've got it, we send it out. Donations come in via our libraries and the co-op services, and we have our local housing association are very active with us. We're very all over the community with health workers, social workers, churches, schools, any community centres. We get donations in. Anybody can request anything for school uniform, coats, shoes. If we've got it, as we say, they can have it.
Last year, I know you gave out over 7,000 items, but in the last 4 weeks alone, tell me about what the experience has been like.
It is just absolutely unbelievable, really. Last year, in 1 year, we did 520 families we helped. In this last 4 weeks, we have had 240 families requesting items. So you can see how much in 4 weeks is over 3,000 items. So we're clearly well beyond what we would have ever imagined. And of course, we're also asked for other things such as underwear, bras, socks, we have run a bra programme because we don't realise that we have bra poverty in this country. So it leads you to more things. But as we say, if we have it, you can have it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time this morning, Julie. I think you summed it up very well there, that families they're in need, and because of the cost of living crisis, uniform is something that you may not automatically think of because we talk about heating and eating, but that is one expense that is now we're in September, lots of families are going to be very stressed about.
Well, Sophie, thank you so much for bringing us that. And it's a good news story in a way that the communities are coming together to help out through difficult times. But
it's very British, isn't it? Very,
absolutely.
very British, but isn't it so sad? In the first place, you need something like a uniform bank.
Yeah. Well, £300 for clothes, it does seem extortionate.
Well, it really is, isn't it? And as Sophie said, it's not a cost that you would think about necessarily. But still to come, do stay with us, because we're going to be talking about university students. We'll be asking, should they make way out of their university halls for migrants? We'll be debating that in just a few moments, and you won't want to miss it.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GBNews.
Hello, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. A fine day in Scotland, sunny spells here, but showers elsewhere and perhaps some longer spells of rain for a time as a number of weather fronts clear through. They are clearing. Low pressure is disappearing through the rest of the day. High pressure builds for the weekend. For the time being, though, the remnants of some rainfall clearing from the southeast, leaving behind a few showers for England and Wales. Some heavy downpours in places, actually, especially North Wales and then later East Anglia in the southeast. An area of cloud, as well as some patchy rain for Northern Ireland, Northern England and the far south of Scotland. But the lion's share of the sunshine, Northern Scotland, here 18 to 20 Celsius. Low 20s further south, where we do get some sunshine coming through. Feeling quite humid in the south, actually. But any heavy showers do tend to disappear into the evening, most places turning dry overnight. The cloud across central areas sinks south. It tends to lower a little, leading to some misty conditions by dawn. A mild night in the south, but where we've got clear skies and the odd fog patch in the north of Scotland. Temperatures in the mid-single figures. So a fresh start for northern Scotland. Any fog slow to clear, but eventually a sunny day here. Elsewhere, a lot of cloud first thing, and actually as the cloud bubbles up and lifts, there could be a few showers once again, but they tend to fade away later, and by and large it's a fine day. More fine weather to come Sunday onwards.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GBNews.
This September, the GB News family is back together. From breakfast, right across the day, breaking the latest stories, and every evening. And And don't forget the weekend. We've got the whole of the UK covered. Every week we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country with fun, lively and intelligent conversation with the biggest guests. This September, we'll meet Chris and John. Thank you for choosing GB News. We're proud to be Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good morning, this is Britain's Newsroom here on GB News and the time is 29 minutes past 10. Now, we're going to be talking in just a moment about an extraordinary story that I think has got a lot of people up in arms, which is the fact that in Huddersfield, university students are being turfed out of university accommodation to make room for asylum seekers.
Yeah, it's really quite extraordinary. Now, this is state-of-the-art student accommodation, not just the standard halls that you might think. It's got a gym, yeah, and it's very modern as well.
I have to say, my university college had a gym, and I did not use it once.
Oh, really? Yeah. Neither did I, to be fair. Maybe the migrants in this story make good use of it.
But we'll be talking about that very, very shortly. Coming up first, though, we're going to get a little catch-up on the morning news with your headlines, which we're going to hear at about past.
With Rhiannon Jones, yes, of course. But in the meantime, on the migrant story, we'll be debating that very, very shortly. Do let us know what you make of that story. If you're a student, or perhaps you're a grandparent or a parent of a student, would you like to see them moved out and a migrant moved into that very glamorous student accommodation? Do let us know. GB News at GBNews.
But now it's time for your headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you. Good morning. It's 10:30. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The government's being urged to publicly reveal which schools are affected by a type of concrete prone to sudden collapse. Thousands of children face disruption ahead of their return to class after safety warnings were issued, forcing the immediate closure of some buildings. More than 100 schools, nurseries and colleges have had to make urgent relocation plans, and some children may be forced back into remote learning. Another wave of strikes hits rail passengers today, bringing some services across the country to a standstill. Members of the ASLEF union are staging a 24-hour walkout, leaving many trains without drivers. The rail delivery group describes the strike as unnecessary, but ASLEF says the government's refusing to make a reasonable pay offer. Well, that as the Transport Secretary is meeting aviation chiefs as thousands of passengers remain stranded abroad. Services to and from the UK were restricted for hours on Monday following an air traffic control glitch. And house prices fell in August at the sharpest annual rate in 14 years, according to Nationwide. The banking giant says annual house prices fell by 5.3% last month, bringing the average property value to £259,000. It's the biggest annual drop since July 2009. And you can get more on all of those stories by logging on to gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2675 and €1.1684. The price of gold is £1,533.37 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,476 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Welcome back to Britain's Newsroom. Now, university students have been forced to find alternative accommodation just a week before their courses start. This after landlords have agreed to move migrants into luxury halls instead.
Well, the Home Office plans to move hundreds of asylum seekers into a 405-bed HD1 tower in Huddersfield with its very own cinema room and gym.
It's much nicer than my student
Well, much nicer than mine as well. Should students be making way for migrants? That's our question this morning.
Well, joining us to discuss this is the former MEP and current Reform UK Party advisor, Ben Habib, and the Refugee and Asylum Rights Director at Amnesty International, Steve Valdez-Simmons. Steve, let's start with you. Have we got this story right? I mean, it seems almost unbelievable to me that students expecting to move into this particular accommodation have been told suddenly that they can't.
Well, I think the only thing that perhaps you're not quite getting right in this story is who's responsible. Students are being made to make way, essentially, for the Home Secretary. She has created an ever-growing, enormous backlog of people who are stuck in her asylum system, and she is casting around ever more widely at ever more great expense for places simply to put people. And unless and until she starts determining the claims of the people so that people can get out of her system, either allowed to stay because they are entitled to asylum, or steps taken to return them to places they have come from if they are not, if she will not decide the claims, the backlog will get bigger, and the Home Office will keep casting around for ever more places to essentially store people.
OK, Ben Habib, let's put this over to you then. Is this the fault of the Home Secretary?
Well, I can't disagree with anything Steve said. I mean, as a matter of fact, if you don't deal with the asylum applications, you're going to have a whole load of people needing accommodation. And whichever way you cut this cake, it seems to me that there's no change out of £50,000 a year to house, feed, care for, and provide cash and other services to an asylum seeker. If you look at the cost of the BB barge, that works out at about £50,000 per head. If you look at hotels, it works out at about £50,000 a head. And even though the student accommodation, which is is an affront to the students and obviously to the university town, is much cheaper on the face of it. Actually, the cost of £200 a week, I think, which is the cost of a flat, it doesn't include all the ancillary services which are going to be needed to be provided. So last year, and this is the big thing for the United Kingdom, I think, leaving aside the social implications of unbridled illegal migration, the big thing was that it cost us £4 billion to look after about 80,000 people. And of course, that bill is rising. It's rising quite fast. And unless we get a grip of the problem, we're not going to find any way out of this, either economically or from a social fabric perspective, in any time soon. And the only way to get rid of the problem, the only way to stop it, to stop the problem from getting bigger, is to stop the boats in the channel and turn them round. Yes, we've got to deal with those that have already made it to our shores, but unless we want to be completely overrun, our hotels taken over, our student accommodation taken over, we've got to get the political courage and will required to enforce our international rights under the UN Convention of Law of the Sea, stop the boats as they seek to illegally enter our territorial waters and turn them round. That is the only solution. We can go on about the ECHR, leaving the European Convention of Human Rights. We can go on about new domestic legislation like the Illegal Migration Act, National Anti and Borders Bill. We can come up with cockamamie plans like Rwanda. Nothing's going to work. The only thing that will work is actually physically stopping the boats and sending them back to France, which, just to remind viewers, is a completely safe country.
And Steve, what do you say to that? Because there are people like Ben who make the case that that's the humane thing to do. It stops people drowning at sea.
If anyone takes a look and pauses for a moment at the boats overcrowded with people, plainly not seaworthy, and what it would mean to try and intercept by simply turning back one of those boats, they will quickly understand that that is a fast route to essentially murdering people at sea. We will see many more capsizes and many more deaths. Of course, that is not in keeping with international law, which requires all nations, and not just nations for that matter, people at sea, to protect human life. There is one way and one way only out of the utter mess the government has created. It is to stop listening to Mr. Habib and others. It is to get back to the business that we expect of every other nation, particularly those in Europe who receive many more people into their asylum systems. It is take your responsibilities that arrive on your shores, process the claims of the people who do so, manage a fair and efficient asylum system, and grant refuge to those who are entitled to it. We demand France does that, and on the whole, to a far larger extent than us, it does so. But for some people, particularly people who have strong connections here, there will continue to be journeys if we provide no alternatives. So deal with their claims, please.
OK, Ben Habib and Steve Valdez-Simmons, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and thank you for your thoughts as well. I'm afraid we're out of time, Ben Habib, otherwise we would, of course, come back to you. Do let us know what you make of that debate there. What side do you sit on? Let us know what you think. Should students make way for asylum seekers? GBNews at GBNews.com.
Neither Ben nor Steve wanted students to make way for asylum seekers, but huge differences of opinion there on how to deal with the numbers that are coming in the first place. Really interesting. No doubt you'll have a view. GBViews at GBnews.com.
Now, junior doctors and consultants in England will strike on the same days together for the first time in the history of the NHS.
Junior doctors have already staged 5 walkouts this year and have now voted to continue their strikes from the 20th to the 22nd of September, the first day coinciding with that walkout by consultants.
Well, the announcement comes after new figures revealed that more than 120,000 people died whilst waiting for treatment last year. Well, here to help consider what a future NHS might look like is GP Dr. Lawrence Gurlis. Really good to see you, Dr. Gurlis. This is significant, isn't it?
Yes, Ellie, Tom, thank you for asking me it is significant, and patients will suffer and patients will die. And that's the main takeout from this, that this is bad for patients, it's bad for the health service. As you said, people are dying on the waiting list already, and this is going to make it worse. Although in general terms, I've always supported the junior doctors and to some extent the senior doctors in their pay demands, the point I've made is that these strikes have not worked. Tom, you said there have been 5 strikes so far. What have they achieved? I think the tactics are wrong. I think it's a very bad look for doctors. I think people are beginning to lose respect for doctors in general who can walk away from their patients in this way. And I've asked the doctors to consider other tactics, such as work to rule, because the striking doesn't work. In fact, on the contrary, I think it plays into the government's hands.
What many doctors who are striking would say is that they're doing this out of the goodness of their own heart. It's because there's a supply crisis in the number of people who are going to work in the NHS. Doctors are leaving for countries like Australia, which, yes, might have a different way that they run their health system, much more private involvement and all the rest of it, and therefore more money. But don't they have a basic case there that other countries do pay doctors more?
Yeah, well, as you say, Tom, Australia, which has a mixed private-public system where people have insurance so they can afford to pay their doctors more. And maybe that's what we should be looking at here. Look, you're right. At the beginning of these strikes, the doctors tried to frame it as we're trying to save the health service. I no longer believe that. Look how much damage is being done to the health service. The strikes are about pay and, as I said, may well be justified. But we can no longer accept that the doctors are doing it to save the health service for the future, because what they're doing is significant damage to the health service, which it may never recover from. We're seeing 1,000, 2,000 people per week of excess deaths, and that's going to continue. And we haven't yet hit the winter crisis. You wait till this December, things are going to get a lot worse. So this is not saving the health service. Even if they got the pay rise, we'd be in a terrible mess.
OK, Dr. Lawrence Gurlis, very good to see you this morning. Thank you so much for your thoughts on that issue, which, as you say, is only set to get worse, isn't it, as we get into the winter?
Stark. Well, still to come, we'll be looking at the top stories today with Nietzsche Hodson and Peter Whittle, so don't go anywhere.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 10:46 and you're with Britain's Newsroom here on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, and Ellie Costello.
Yes, it's time to go through the top stories today, and joining us this morning is author and commentator Nikki Hodgson and director of the New Culture Forum, Peter Whittle. Very good morning to you both. Very good to have you both with us. And Peter, let's start with you, shall we? This is a story that caught my eye this morning in the Times. Hampton Court Palace is telling its visitors how to avoid that ULEZ charge in London.
This is actually a fascinating story for all sorts of reasons. It's in all three of the papers this morning. You know, we had the ULEZ charge coming in this week. And, of course, people have been destroying cameras and things. But this comes from Hampton Court Palace, which is actually run by the Historic Palace's charity. What it is that when you approach Hampton Court, you're OK when it comes to the ULEZ charge. But when you leave, you immediately go into it. So they are putting on their website saying, don't turn that way, turn this way, right? I admire them for doing that, you know, because the fact is Hampton Court Palace, along with other places like Chessington Zoo and places like that, they are caught right in the middle of this outrageous charge, you know, and so they're actually sort of helping people, and I think they provided a public service, I think.
I suppose it's interesting, Nikki, because this isn't like sort of those who are vandalising cameras or anything. This is perfectly legal. It's saying just use this exit, not that one.
Absolutely. I don't really know why everyone's got in such a hoo-ha about it. Oh, actually, because it's not going to bring any money in if Hampton Court Palace, they go around this way and not that way. And I think it's perfectly reasonable for any property that expects people to come and visit to give those instructions, because actually people are remarkably easily put off by things like, you know, how many times in London, certainly I live in London, how many times have I said, oh, you know what, I'm not going to bother because there's a strike on or the road's closed or, you know, it's just too tricky to get there. So I think it's perfectly reasonable. And, you know, Hampton Court Palace is of national importance. It's a beautiful place. It's, you know, its kind of exhibitions are out of this world. And the idea that they would suffer because of ULEZ just seems preposterous, really.
But it does highlight, doesn't it, for those on the outskirts of the ULEZ boundary, especially if you're a small business.
Oh, you know, the anger, I know you've covered it a lot this week on GB News, but the anger about this is just off the charts now, and I'm quite right too. I mean, fact is, you know, it's £12.50. If you don't pay it, the fine is huge. I think it's something like 150 quid pretty quickly. And also, people are not convinced, quite rightly, that this is actually a sincere thing, you know, that this is not about air quality, this is actually about a tax, you know, being put on cars that are considered unsuitable. You know, we've even had the situation, again, which came to light, where the only kind of academic who's actually said air quality is improved is, in fact, someone who gets money from the mayor. He's at Imperial College. No, I mean,
but of course, what the mayor would say, and what he's been saying all week, is that this only affects 10% of cars. If you drive a classic car, it's not covered. If you drive a car petrol after 2006, it's not covered. Most people will be not affected by the ULEZ expansion.
Well, I think a lot of people, otherwise there wouldn't be such anger. I think businesses are going to be seriously affected. And also, it's just an ongoing war, Tom, really, on the idea of the car. I mean, you know, that's what this is all part of. And if you're not careful, this mayor is going to just suck all the lifeblood out of this city, I think. You know, the Hampton Court stories might seem like a small one, but, you know, in a way it's indicative, actually, of the general attitude, which is people do not like this.
Okay, no, I mean, people don't, but I think what is important to say, Peter, is that, you know, there are so many instances now of children that are really suffering with asthma and respiratory problems because of the quality of the air in London. There are children that have died. You know, these are parents that have campaigned for years about this. And also, let's go back to who introduced this policy. Actually, it was Boris Johnson who wanted to do this, first of all.
Absolutely. No, I didn't. It might well have been. I'm not sort of standing up for, you know, Boris or the Tories or anything on this. What's been fascinating is that, in fact, air quality on the tube, which I use a lot, I don't know whether you do, is actually appalling. Nothing from the mayor about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very valid point. There are air quality issues everywhere.
Because he can't get money from it.
No, but he could have done more to do, you know, he could have raised parking. There are so many other areas he could have gone to if he wanted to just make money. I do think he actually believes in this policy. What I think the problem with it is that he's not selling it properly to people. Instead of saying, I know this really hurts you, I know this is going to hit all of us who use cars, I know it's going to make your business difficult, but we have to do it for the sake of our children. That's how to sell it. That's the whole point of it. It's for people's health.
Look,
what about the public health issue?
Yeah, the thing is, when you say, you know, we should care about kids and all the rest of it, I mean, the fact is, look, it's like the smoking. It's the smoking argument. You know, if you really care so much about health, just ban cigarettes. That's what people say. There's a logic to that. He should do that with cars, right? Why he doesn't is because it's a money maker. That's why it is. And similarly with cigarettes, you know, the tax goes straight to the government. It's a form of revenue. That's what this is about. I think you're being way too... I'd say you're being naive about his motives, actually.
Oh, well, I don't think so. I mean, I have a baby daughter. We live in the outskirts of London. Yeah. This policy would positively benefit her health. You know, she's 6 months old. I am already concerned about what air she's breathing in. And I'm not obsessive about it. I'm not like that about my health either. But the point is, if a policy that will only affect 10% of people can be brought in that will positively stop her having respiratory problems and to hundreds and thousands of children around, you know, often the poorest children in London, let's be really honest about that.
Although, let's be honest about the 10% as well, because it's not the 10% of richest or most expensive cars, it's the 10% of perhaps cheapest, oldest cars.
No, but the issue of that, what they cost isn't the matter. It's the fact that they're polluting. If the more expensive cars were polluting, well, then go after those. But it just so happens that they're not. So, you know, the really unfortunate thing about climate change and getting on top of the climate crisis is that all of us will have to make some sacrifices.
Do you think that politicians aren't honest about that?
And I absolutely agree with this. What I do not like is the fact that governments go after the smallest people. They go after... They make us take on the burden of sacrifices when, you know, businesses and factories and, you know, munitions...
But Nikki, isn't it the case... Hang on, hold on, Peter and Nikki, because isn't it the case that if you go after factories, then they put their prices up. That affects little people as well. Is it not the case that when Rishi Sunak or Sir Keir Starmer stands up there and says, we're going to have a green industrial revolution and everyone's going to be better off for it, they're not telling the whole truth. Everyone's going to pay a price.
The point is, we'll be dead if we don't do this. We'll be dead anyway. I mean, I'll be dead anyway sooner than this happens. But the point is, we will literally wipe out the human race if we do not get control of the climate crisis.
This is catastrophe talking, which is just quite ridiculous, right?
Well, it's not, Peter.
No,
it's
it is.
So scientifically solid that we are hurtling towards.
Nikki,
look at the fires that we've just had in Europe and the livelihoods of people that are staying.
Let me finish. You basically said then, why do governments pick on the small people? That is exactly what Khan is doing. I mean, you're contradicting yourself.
I'm not contradicting
myself. That's exactly what he's doing. If you've got an older or cheaper car, and that includes many, say, like older people, for example, who maybe have bought a car for retirement, things like that.
But he's not picking on them.
Peter and Nikki, we have run to the end of the segment. We will pick this up later in the show because, my goodness, it has got feisty. And thank you so much for being with us here on Britain's Newsroom. Much more to come, including more on that reshuffle. Stay with us.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. A fine day in Scotland, sunny spells here, but showers elsewhere and perhaps some longer spells of rain for a time as a number of weather fronts clear through. They are clearing. Low pressure is disappearing through the rest of the day. High pressure builds for the weekend. For the time being, though, the remnants of some rainfall clearing from the southeast, leaving behind a few showers for England and Wales. Some heavy downpours in places, actually, especially North Wales and then later East Anglia in the southeast. An area of cloud, as well as some patchy rain for Northern Ireland, Northern England and the far south of Scotland. But the lion's share of the sunshine, Northern Scotland, here 18 to 20 Celsius. Low 20s further south, where we do get some sunshine coming through. Feeling quite humid in the south, actually. But any heavy showers do tend to disappear into the evening, most places turning dry overnight. The cloud across central areas sinks south. It tends to lower a little, leading to some misty conditions by dawn. A mild night in the south, but where we've got clear skies and the odd fog patch in the north of Scotland. Temperatures in the mid-single figures. So a fresh start for northern Scotland. Any fog slow to clear, but eventually a sunny day here. Elsewhere, a lot of cloud first thing, and actually as the cloud bubbles up and lifts, there could be a few showers once again, but they tend to fade away later, and by and large it's a fine day. More fine weather to come Sunday onwards.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my new show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m, where real people get to meet those in power and hold them to account. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country in the real world. Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's new.
This September, the GB News family is back together. From breakfast, right across the day, breaking the latest stories, and every evening. And don't forget the weekend. We've got the whole of the UK covered. Every week we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country, with fun, lively and intelligent conversation with the biggest guests. This September, we'll meet Chris and John. Thank you for choosing GB News. We're proud to be Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 11 a.m. on Friday the 1st of September. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Tom Harwood and me, Ellie Costello. Coming up for you today.
Back to school chaos. Thousands of pupils forced back into lockdown-style lessons and parents left in limbo as crumbling, unsafe classrooms are closed across the country.
Shuffling the deck chairs. What's the fallout from Rishi Sunak's ministerial mix around, and could it be the key to turning around his ailing polls?
Are the police starting to wake up? With fresh announcements this week, we'll be looking at a brand new play that satirises the Met Police and even journalists like us.
As the clock ticks down with only 1 hour left on football transfer deadline day, former England star Carlton Palmer brings us up to speed with the latest football news.
And of course, through it all, we want your thoughts and opinions. Don't forget to write into gbviews@gbnews.com. We'll be getting to some of those a little later on. What do you make of this potential new lockdown learning for thousands of students across the country, thanks to crumbling school buildings? We'll get to that after the news with Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you, Tom. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 11. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The government's being urged to publicly reveal which schools are affected by a particular kind of concrete that's prone to sudden collapse. Thousands of children face disruption ahead of their return to class after safety warnings were issued, forcing the immediate closure of some buildings. More than 100 schools, nurseries and colleges have had to make urgent relocation plans, and some children may be forced back to remote learning. Schools Minister Nick Gibb told GB News the government's prioritising safety.
We took this decision as swiftly as we could. We had to look at the evidence, we had to discuss that evidence with experts, we had to make sure we had plans in place for what schools would be doing when they were told that they probably needed to address this, what was previously regarded as low-risk RAC in their schools. But it's the right decision, it's the most cautious decision.
But Shadow Justice Secretary Steve Reed told us that more should have been done.
If they'd put the measures in place at the beginning of the summer holidays, parents wouldn't be finding out now, just days before the start of the school term, that their child has not got a school to go to. And if you just imagine how exhausted parents are after the long summer holidays, after all the disruption of the pandemic, after all of the disruption of the strikes that the government refused to intervene in to help sort out as well. Now more disruption with just days of notice when the government could have done something at the beginning of the summer that they didn't. It is neglect and it is incompetence on the part of the government.
Another wave of strikes hits rail passengers today, bringing some services across the country to a standstill. Members of the ASLEF union are staging a 24-hour walkout, leaving many trains without drivers. The rail delivery group describes the strike as unnecessary, but the union says the government's refusing to make a reasonable pay offer. The dispute, which started over a year ago now, remains at deadlock, with no talks planned and no sign of a breakthrough. General Secretary of ASLEF, Mick Whelan, says they'll keep striking until a reasonable pay offer is made.
The reality is that we haven't seen the Transport Minister since last December. We haven't seen the Rail Minister since the Act of Bad Faith in January, and we haven't seen the RDG since the deal they put to us with our red lines in that they set up to fail in April. We've been here now for the best part of 14 months. If it takes another 14 months or another 14 years, we'll still be here. And at some point, somebody's going to have to come and talk to us and resolve this situation.
Two former leaders of far-right group the Proud Boys have been jailed on charges relating to the storming of the US Capitol building in Washington. Joseph Biggs and Zachary Rowell were convicted of seditious conspiracy for trying to overturn Donald Trump's 2020 election defeat. Their prison terms of 15 and 17 years are below US sentencing guidelines and far lower than 30-year terms sought by federal prosecutors. Both broke down crying, with Rell saying he let politics consume his life and lost track of who and what matters. House prices fell in August at the sharpest annual rate in 14 years. According to Nationwide, the banking giant says annual house prices fell by 5.3% last month, bringing the average property value to £259,000. It's the biggest annual drop since July 2009. Direct Line will pay £30 million in compensation to customers who've been overcharged whilst renewing their insurance. The company admitted to an error in implementing new pricing rules, which came into effect at the start of last year. The Financial Conduct Authority brought in the new rules to protect existing customers from being quoted higher prices than new customers. Changes to vaccine programmes will make it easier for people to get protected, ultimately saving lives. That's according to the NHS. Almost 1 million more people will now be eligible for a shingles vaccine. The HPV jab offered to children in a bid to eliminate cervical cancer will go from 2 doses to just 1. The changes will start on the 11th of September. And Fergus, Jocelyn and Debbie, just some of the storms we might expect next season. The Met Office says they're being named after the very people working to protect us from them. Meteorologists name storms only when they're expected to have a medium or high impact on people. Forecasters say it helps communicate the seriousness of a storm. It'll be the first time the traditional male and female ordering of names is altered. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car and digital radio and on your smart speakers by saying play GB News now. It's back over to Tom and Ellie.
Welcome to Britain's Newsroom here on GB News. And I have to say, a lot of you have been getting in contact with us about all the stories that we've been talking about today. But one of the ones that has particularly been leading the discussion is this crumbling schools issue that may well be leading to a sort of form of lockdown for thousands of students across the country. Why? Because buildings are being deemed unsafe in over 100 schools in England due to aerated concrete, cheap concrete, that has really passed its sell-by date.
Yes, and it's thought that this could now be prone to sudden collapse. And Kew, about 104 schools in England are being told they cannot open as expected on Monday. There is a scramble for many families in England where children will not be able to attend school. They will have to learn at home, and those parents will be forced once again to homeschool. If you are one of those parents or those families that are scrambling for childcare now for Monday, do let us know. gbviews@gbnews.com. It's going to be a very, very difficult and challenging weekend for so many. And of course, after COVID lockdowns, it's just a reminder of those really challenging times.
It begs huge, huge questions for the government. But perhaps let's discuss some of the implications for this now. We're joined by the former government special advisor, James Price. James, this is such an interesting story, and it's so relevant to you, perhaps, because you have both been a special advisor in the Department for Education and you've been an advisor in the Treasury. Now, both of these departments are being blamed for this.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. And, of course, the heart of it is the potential for something really catastrophically tragic to happen, right? And so safety has to be the first issue. And it's also sad because the Department for Education, something I've worked at, as you say, I've been quite critical of in all kinds of ways. Actually, the schools rebuilding programme is really good. The new schools that are getting built, they're fancy net zero things, good for the environment, they're nice, they don't go freezing in the winter. And
they're not made of concrete that crumbles after 30 years.
Right. But the difficulty is in the conversations that every department ends up having with the Treasury in the centre. And of course, it's right that the Treasury has to get value for money. It's one of the only bits of the public sector that isn't always desperate to spend as much money as possible all the time. Money has to be spent well. But when you're building public buildings like schools, and we all think that the state should provide education for those that can't afford to pay for private schools and things like that, actually you end up keeping the asset on the asset side of the balance sheet. So actually it's not really money being wasted because you still own the property, still own the land and all those sorts of things. So we tried really hard when Nadeem Zahawi was the Education Secretary in the last spending review to get more money for the schools rebuilding programme. And unfortunately, Treasury brain doesn't see it in quite the same way. I'm not blaming the politicians, but the general ethos of some of the civil servants there is not to encourage this kind of spending as much as we think is necessary.
So in the last spending review, which was presided over by Rishi Sunak, you asked for more money to rebuild these schools, to make sure these schools were safe, and he said no.
No. So there's a conversation that goes back and forth on all kinds of different areas. And one of the areas that we really wanted more was for this schools rebuilding programme to go faster. And the argument is that you get to keep the asset on that side of the balance sheet, and therefore it doesn't look like as much of a cost in these ways. And you go back and forth on all kinds of areas, whether it's the catch-up for COVID, whether it's other kinds of tuition, all these other kind of areas. And in the back and forth, we think that we wanted more for this because of exactly this kind of risk. And it's not now the Prime Minister's fault, but it is various officials who don't see it in that way and those sorts of horrible little internecine arguments that happen in between. But this is why I think it's really important because, if one of these things falls down, then just can you imagine the tragedy of it?
Well, it's absolute worst case scenario, and you can see why you would absolutely want to avoid that. But there will be questions asked about how it has got to this point. How have we had a 6-week holiday? Now we have this absolute scramble for parents who essentially will have children at home on Monday. They will have to be teaching them from a laptop once again in the style of COVID lockdowns. I mean, we heard from John Oxley at 9:30 this morning, one of our guests, who said that engineers were really flagging this up as an issue in 1995. That was almost 30 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember some of the school buildings that I was taught in, and they would fall down if you hit a football against them too hard. And we've gone a long way since there. There's an awful lot of improvement. I just think more needs to be done. And I guess some of it will probably come down to the fact that it's so darn difficult to build anything in this country anymore, Can you imagine that if this is some other NIMBY kind of concern of people not wanting diggers to be coming in and rebuilding things in the way that, Tom, I know it's very difficult for anything to get built in this country anymore, and this is the result sometimes.
Yeah, heaven forfend, a tree might have to come down and maybe a rare bird might live in that tree. Suddenly all the interest groups in the land say nothing can be built, nothing can be changed. It is very expensive to build in this country. Is that potentially one of the problems here? Recently, the campaign group Britain Remade revealed that infrastructure in this country costs about 4 times as much to build than it does in France, for example.
Yeah, and it's really maddening, again, whichever department you end up being in, trying to get these various things done. And it's good that we don't live in a system, obviously, like China, where they can literally just bulldoze down things and don't take any account of anything. You have to bring people along with you. But I think that there are much better arguments coming out now from some of the think tanks. The Adam Smith Institute that I'm working at the moment has all sorts of good ideas about this. If people don't like it, and they are going to be negatively affected, there's building works going on, it's noisy, we don't like it, then can you find a way to compensate? You mentioned France. People that live around nuclear power stations in France, they have their energy paid for them. And that's a massive boost for them, right? We did those sorts of things, and you compensate people for the negative externality that they face, then maybe their disagreements will be...
Well, you raise energy and you raise nuclear power in what I think is a fantastic segue, because, of course, there has been this mini reshuffle this week. And some people have raised the question mark over this. We have got Grant Shapps now on his 5th department of the last 12 months. And yet again, another new face being the Energy Secretary. Is that bad for energy strategy?
I don't think it will be. I think there's always the risk when these things happen, and I think that far too often people have been moved around too often. Ben Wallace, the outgoing Defence Secretary, he was in post for 4 years, widely considered the best and most popular member of the Cabinet, done a great job on Ukraine, partly because he got to stay in there for so long. And Grant, bless him, has had to move around all these different departments. Let's hope he gets a nice long tenure to continue the work that's been done. On the energy point, you've got someone now who is young, exciting, dynamic, brimming full of ideas, unlike perhaps, we're talking about Claire Coutinho, unlike some of her colleagues, has not given up, is not going quietly into that good night, and is desperate to show that the Conservatives can still win and have some ideas.
And have you worked at all with Claire Coutinho in your time? Because she's had the most exponential rise, really. She's only been an MP since 2019, and now she's going to be the youngest person sat around the Cabinet table.
Yeah, it's an amazing
Just 38 years old.
It puts me to shame. My mum called me this morning and said, "What are you doing with yourself?" No, I worked with Claire a little bit when we were special advisors together, a little bit in government as well. She is whip smart. some people will be saying, oh, isn't it great to see another woman around the cabinet table from an ethnic minority? And those things are important. But I think your viewers are discerning enough to know that's not the most important thing. It's the content of her character. It's the brain full of ideas that she's got on top of her shoulders. I think that it's the perfect appointment for exciting new energy security stuff that we need. We've seen the problems that can happen in energy at the moment with the Russian war going on in Ukraine, just the horrors there and how that's had a knock-on effect. Look at Germany. They've turned off all their nuclear power plants. They're tearing up wind turbines to put coal-powered stations back in again by the Green Party. This is absolutely bonkers. And hopefully with someone like Claire at the helm there, Britain can get itself its energy security and reach some kind of net zero at some point as well.
Well, really, really good to get that insight from you. And just briefly, what do you make of Grant Shapps as defence now? Because there were some very big names in that hat, weren't there? We were talking about Penny Mordaunt, Tom Tugendhat, even Johnny Mercer at one point. What do you make of Grant Shapps now in defence?
I think people have written him off before. I worked for Grant very briefly a long time ago, and he always bounces back. I think he's going to surprise people on the upside. Ben Wallace has laid a great foundation, and not to be too much of a suck-up, I think he's going to do a great job. People should give him a chance.
OK.
Wow, James Price, thank you very much for talking us through. And I mean, it's remarkable. We booked James Price, obviously, before we knew what the big stories of today would be. And he just slotted, like, all of his previous jobs in government just fit precisely. It's just such a great booking.
Tom
anyway,
is very excited about this, so thank you very much, James. Really good to see you.
Goodness me.
Now, the number of homes sold this year is expected to reach its lowest level in more than a decade. Low house prices and higher mortgage rates mean many buyers simply can't afford them.
It's estimated that 1 million sales will go through this year. That's the equivalent of the average household moving once every 23 years.
Well, joining us now is the head of economics and social policy at Policy Exchange, Warwick Lightfoot. Very good to see you this morning. I mean, perhaps no surprise, really, that people just simply cannot afford to move home.
Well, first I should say I'm no longer head of economics at Policy Exchange. I moved on about a year ago. And I think clearly the question you've got at the moment is house prices went up a very long way. They became unaffordable. And then you had a very necessary increase in interest rates. And that's going to mean that the sort of prices you were seeing about 2 years ago had to come off. And I think on the whole, it's a desirable thing.
And what do you think will happen next? What's your prediction with interest rates? Because many are predicting that they will go up once again in September. It's very, 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 very difficult out there for people who own their homes.
I think that probably interest rates will have to go up a bit further. To get inflation down to 2%, normally you've got to have two things: a sustained period of positive real interest rates and a short period when you lose output. And I think we're going to do this, getting inflation down without those things in place. I think you will be disappointed. Both in the US and in the UK at the moment, there's a bit of debate about whether interest rates have actually peaked. It's a nice idea, but I think that they probably haven't. The other thing I'd say about interest rates is we've had to get back to higher interest rates, not just to get inflation down, but to get a banking system and credit markets that function properly, so that you price credit properly and you don't have zombie companies and you don't actually have asset price bubbles. And I think you're going to find these much higher interest rates in place for much longer.
What do you make of the argument that stamp duty as a tax really makes the housing market much stickier than it otherwise would be, stops people downsizing, stops people moving around, and gums up this whole market in a way that if it were abolished or reduced or reformed, perhaps things would move a little bit more freely?
I couldn't agree with you more. It's not just stamp duty on houses, it's stamp duty on equities. People wonder why the London stock market's atrophying. One of the issues there that should be looked at is stamp duty. And stamp duty is it's grit that gets in the way of people doing things they would like to do. And we used to have stamp duties that were at a much lower level about 25 years ago, and then successive chancellors thought they could milk it as a source of revenue and pretend that they were somehow taxing the housing market. And all it does, it means the housing market works much less efficiently. And people who would like to move house, maybe sell a larger house, go to a smaller one and so on, simply don't do it.
And is there a small silver lining in any of this for first-time buyers, in the sense that house prices are coming down somewhat, or is it more the sense that they actually wouldn't be able to get a mortgage?
Well, I think there is a problem with the mortgages, but also the prices coming down is a very big help. we've all lived in a world where we're used to house prices in Britain going up. You were talking about the planning system a second ago that gets in the way of building houses. But I'm 66. I'm in that middle of that cohort called the baby boomers. And if the average age for dying is around 83. But with an average, a hell of a lot of people have got to be culled in advance. And that means in your early 60s and in your mid 70s. So you're going to begin to see this cohort naturally throwing off this mortal coil, and they own properties, and those properties are going to come onto the market. I think the sort of debate you had this morning or this afternoon about the deficiencies of the planning system means eventually we're going to get a reform of the planning system, so there'll be more housing supply. And whether you're going to see houses straightforwardly just going up from these still very high levels, I think we may see a change in the structure of the pricing of the housing market.
Really interesting stuff there. I suppose it continues to be the case that compared to the average European country, we have 4 million fewer homes, a faster growing population than many European countries as well, and simple supply and demand means we have all of these problems. No, really, really interesting conversation there. And of course, big problems to come in the future, no doubt.
Yes, Warwick Lightfoot, really good to see you this morning. Thank you very, very much for your time. Do let us know what you make of that story, gbnews@gbnews.com.
Well, still to come, as the police are under fire again this week, we'll be joined by the director of a West End play that's making waves for reimagining the Metropolitan Police. Find out how after this.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. A fine day in Scotland, sunny spells here, but showers elsewhere and perhaps some longer spells of rain for a time as a number of weather fronts clear through. They are clearing. Low pressure is disappearing through the rest of the day. High pressure builds for the weekend. For the time being, though, the remnants of some rainfall clearing from the southeast, leaving behind a few showers for England and Wales. Some heavy downpours in places, actually, especially North Wales and then later East Anglia in the southeast. An area of cloud, as well as some patchy rain for Northern Ireland, Northern England and the far south of Scotland. But the lion's share of the sunshine, Northern Scotland, here 18 to 20 Celsius. Low 20s further south, where we do get some sunshine coming through. Feeling quite humid in the south, actually. But any heavy showers do tend to disappear into the evening, most places turning dry overnight. The cloud across central areas sinks south. It tends to lower a little, leading to some misty conditions by dawn. A mild night in the south, but where we've got clear skies and the odd fog patch in the north of Scotland. Temperatures in the mid-single figures. So a fresh start for northern Scotland. Any fog slow to clear, but eventually a sunny day here. Elsewhere, a lot of cloud first thing, and actually as the cloud bubbles up and lifts, there could be a few showers once again, but they tend to fade away later, and by and large it's a fine day. More fine weather to come Sunday onwards.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world. The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
A very good morning. It's 11:26 and you're with Britain's Newsroom here on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, and Ellie Costello. And now, this week the government announced that all crimes must be investigated by the police. Sounds like something that really should have been happening anyway. And the Prime Minister announced a new ban on so-called zombie knives. It's all part of what's been termed Crime Week, a focus on law and order from the government across this week.
But law and order has become an increasingly controversial topic, and a new play in the West End has been satirising the Metropolitan Police. The Accidental Death of an Anarchist is a comedy about an anarchist which accidentally falls to his death from a police window.
Accidentally?
Accidentally.
Well, joining us now is the director of the play, Daniel Raggett. And Daniel, this is a very funny play. But I suppose it gets to the heart of a pretty serious issue, which is clearly there is a big question mark over trust in the police.
Well, I think that's got to be a core tenet of policing by consent, right? You've got to believe there's accountability and trust that when the police are sort of going to do their jobs. And I think you only have to open a newspaper or every day. I mean, it was, I think, yesterday that the officer who chased the two kids in Manchester is now being investigated for dangerous driving. And it's sort of, you know, there's this constant cycle of high profile and smaller, though no less important, like police abuses, basically.
And this play is a modern reimagining of a much older play by the same name, the Italian original accidental death of an anarchist. Is this just a sort of issue that is across all cultures, across all countries, time immemorial?
I mean, I couldn't possibly say, but all I do know is that the original was based on the death in police custody of a man called Giuseppe Pinelli in Milan in the late 60s. And essentially what Dario Fo, the original writer, did was he took the transcripts of the police sort of trying to worm their way out of culpability and just began to perform them. And the farcical nature of that gave birth to the comedy in itself. Because, I mean, if you... again, some of the things that we read in the news and excuses that we have for
events where the police have sort of are clearly culpable for something, but the Federation managed to rally round.
So was it easy to find humour there? Was it easy to sort of poke fun and make bigger? And I mean, there are musical numbers in this.
Well, I think the thing that was important is that we felt that it is a system, so nobody is safe. That's right and left. Essentially, what we found is that even if it's very easy to be sort of vociferously anti-police, but at the same time, a lot of the time you just saying that isn't enough. How do you take action? And so, again, it was important for us that we're sort of poking fun at both sides and the whole system as well. But it's a very, very funny play, but at the core of it is a really, really serious issue. And people, we have a tally in the show of deaths in police custody since 1990 in England and Wales, which keeps going up and has gone up by 11 since we've been performing the show at the Haymarket, which is only since June.
And at the heart of this play is that issue of trust in the police. What do you find is the audience reaction to that, especially in the West End, where we know that trust is at an all-time low in the Metropolitan Police? How do they engage with the play?
I think people, it's very... Tom Baslin's adaptation, it is sort of bang up to date, and he continues to rewrite it as more news stories come out.
The line about Barbenheimer that was inserted.
Yeah, there was a line
recently.
about Barbenheimer, yeah, which but it's amazing. The news cycle nowadays, everything becomes out of date suddenly, so I'm already thinking, what's the next excessively long film that we've got to mention? But I think people... What I hope is that people enjoy recognising those references, the Barbenheimer references, and that's kind of that's funny and that's fun. But what we managed to sneak in, I hope, is genuine facts about police misconduct that are all taken from things like the Casey report that people laugh at because it seems so unbelievable. I mean, there's a quote in it about the sheer number of officers who were facing misconduct proceedings who hadn't been removed from the force. And so hearing this week, I think it's got to be progress that at least now those officers aren't in direct contact with the public and still in their job.
So if the audience, if people watching today want to catch the last few performances of this show that not only takes the mick out of the police, but also takes the mick out of judges and the judiciary and right-on journalists.
People like me as well.
People like you as well. How do they do it?
Well, you can go, if you can turn up to the theatre and go to the box office. You can go on anarchistwestend.com and buy tickets. I mean, it finishes in a week's time on September the 9th. And I also think that an important thing to say is on Tuesday, after the show, we're doing a talk back with Inquest, which is a brilliant charity we work with, who look into state-related deaths. And so come along to that as well.
OK, Daniel O'Raga, really good to see you, and you can still catch tickets for that play as well.
Not sold out.
It's really, really good. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Now, do stay with us. We're going to be talking about Football England player Carlton Palmer. He's going to be sharing his thoughts on Gareth Southgate's latest team selection, and our formidable GB News co-presenter Mark Dolan joins us. So do stay with us. But first, let's get your news with Rhiannon Jones.
Ellie, thank you. Good morning. It's 11:32. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The government's being urged to publicly reveal which schools are affected by a type of concrete prone to sudden collapse. Thousands of children face disruption ahead of their return to class after safety warnings were issued, forcing the immediate closure of some buildings. More than 100 schools, nurseries and colleges have had to make urgent relocation plans, and some children may be forced back into remote learning. Another wave of strikes hits rail passengers today, bringing some services across the country to a standstill. Members of the ASLEF union are staging a 24-hour walkout, leaving many trains without drivers. The rail delivery group describes the strike as unnecessary, but ASLEF says the government's refusing to make a reasonable pay offer. That as the Transport Secretary is meeting aviation chiefs as thousands of passengers remain stranded abroad. Services to and from the UK were restricted for hours on Monday following an air traffic control glitch. More than a quarter of flights were cancelled, causing a backlog that's lasted several days. An inquiry into what happens due on Monday. And house prices fell in August at the sharpest annual rate in 14 years, according to Nationwide. The banking giant says annual house prices fell by 5.3% last month, bringing the average property value to £259,000. It's the biggest annual drop since July 2009. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2677 and €1.1688. The price of gold is £1,533.77 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,470 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
Well, now to the latest football news. Gareth Southgate announced his selection for the England team yesterday. As well as the summer football transfer window, it closes tonight at 11 p.m.
Well, Premier League clubs have spent a record £1.95 billion on players in the summer transfer window, with spending expected to exceed £2 billion. That's according to reports.
Well, joining us now to give his perspective is football manager and former player Carlton Palmer. Carlton, thank you so much for making the time for us this morning. First of all, over £2 billion on players moving about. I mean, why so much money?
I can't get my head around it, to be fair. But it's really crazy and in my opinion, overinflated prices for some players. I mean, you know, I can't believe even the sides that have just been promoted and the sides down the bottom of the league, the amount of money they're spending is phenomenal. Really
yeah, especially in a cost of living crisis, it does seem quite stark to so many people. But to football fans, transfer deadline day is a big occasion, isn't it?
Yeah, it's massive. It's massive. But it's interesting in this transfer window as well that the top clubs are selling players to other top clubs, which never was heard of. Players wouldn't go from Chelsea to Tottenham or very rarely, to Man City. Havertz going from Chelsea to Arsenal. Very rarely did it happen, but it's happening a lot in this transfer window and for big money. It's quite remarkable.
And very often we get these.
As well. I think we have to put this into context. A lot of people think there's a lot of money generated from football, a lot of serious money generated from football. And if you actually work it out, I was speaking to somebody the other day. If you do the maths, 92 football league clubs, average 30 players at each football club. There's actually only 2,700, 2,800 professional footballers. Put that in the grand scheme of 60 million and then compare it to the type of money that bankers are earning and whatever. It's still obscene, but it is in a little bit more perspective.
Now, we very often get sort of last-minute deals on the last possible day, maybe in the last few hours. Are we expecting any big deals still to come?
Well, the one I'm really keen to see is the one about Mo Salah, because they're pushing hard, the Saudis, to get him, and that could be a problem for Jurgen Klopp because the transfer window will close today in the UK at midnight tonight, but the transfer window in Saudi goes for another week, so that gives Jurgen Klopp no time to replace Mo Salah. I mean, they're talking upwards of 150 million for Mo Salah. I still think that's, if you look at Harry Kane go for 100 million, what do you get for 100 million in terms of the world-class players Mo Salah and Harry Kane are? They're very hard to replace. So that's a major problem and a major issue for Liverpool and Jurgen Klopp. I happen to believe, I think Mo Salah is committed to Liverpool Football Club, but the owners might say, listen, 150 million for a player who's approaching 30, they might accept it.
Carlton, whilst we've got you, I need to ask you about Gareth Southgate, obviously naming his England squad for the upcoming Euro 2024 qualifiers. No Raheem Sterling in this squad, but Jordan Henderson has been called into the squad, and that's despite his controversial move to Saudi Arabia in the summer. So what do you make of the squad?
Well, it's a bit contradictory. It really is. You know, if you have players who are banging form. Raheem Sterling started the season banging form. He should be in the England squad. He's always been his go-to. Harry Maguire hasn't played a minute's football in a Premier League. And, you know, you can't pick... I know managers have their go-to, and I played for England and I've been picked when I've not been particularly playing well. And obviously, you're picked on what you've done in the past. And Harry Maguire's never let England down, and I'm not picking on Harry Maguire. I think Jordan Henderson's the same. I think once he's made that move, having come out with all the things he's done, you know, all the things he said and done, it's a bit controversial, but he shouldn't be left out of the England squad because of that. But I think the standard of football isn't going to be the same. I think, you know, Gareth, I think in his mind thinking, he knows that this is his last major tournament, so he's going to do it the way that he wants to do it. But, you know, if you're saying to players, play well and I'll select you, you're being a bit contradictory by picking players who aren't playing and then leaving out players who've been your go-to, who started the season in absolutely scintillating form for Chelsea.
Oh, so much to mull over there. Carlton Palmer, thank you so much for joining us this morning on Britain's Newsroom.
Yes, and do stay with us because we're going to be joined by Mark Dolan as he has his big return to our screens later on today. He'll be telling us what to expect, so don't miss it.
This September, the GB News family is back together. From breakfast, right across the day, breaking the latest stories, and every evening. And don't forget the weekend. We've got the whole of the UK covered. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country, with fun, lively and intelligent conversation with the biggest guests. This September, we'll meet Chris and John. Thank you for choosing GB News. We're proud to be Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Good morning, welcome back. It's 11:43. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Tom Harwood and me, Ellie Costello. And it has been a busy summer for our GB News presenters, and we have sorely missed the presence of one of our most lovable stars on our screens.
Yes, making his big return tonight, live from 9 to 11 p.m, is the fantastic Mr. Mark Dolan, who joins us now to tell us more about what we can look forward to on his shows. Mark, what's coming up this evening?
Lovable. I didn't realise you were allowed to drink at lunchtime. Thank you for the compliment. Listen, I'm loving the show, Ellie and Tom. We are coming back with a bang tonight. So will you get boosted to save the NHS? My Mark Meets guest is the man who survived cancer and went on to win the Grand National Bob Champion CBE. I've watched the Prince Harry Netflix documentary, so you don't have to. I'll be giving my verdict in my take at 10, and I'm not pulling my punches. Also, is it time to forgive and forget in relation to Prince Andrew? We'll be asking his biggest cheerleader, maybe his only cheerleader, Lady Victoria Hervey. And also, with net zero, ULEZ, a cashless society, and COVID tyranny, whatever happened to people power? The public seem to think now that we serve the government rather than the other way round. That's my big opinion. So lots to get through tonight.
Well, Mark, it sounds like it's a feisty show, and can I just say thank you very much for telling everyone what was exactly in my mug. I was trying to keep that secret this lunchtime, but oh well.
Mark, really good to see you. It sounds like a great show, and people can catch you from 9 p.m. Thanks so much. He looks very well rested and buoyant,
yes.
as our Mark Dolan.
No,
He's ready, isn't he?
It is ready indeed. It's Shall we get through some of these top stories today? Joining us this morning is the author and commentator Nikki Hodgson and the director of the New Culture Forum, Peter Whittle. Peter, in the Telegraph, you've picked out something about the RSPB, the bird conservation charity. What on earth could possibly be going on there?
Well, yes, it might seem a bit obscure, Tom, but it's sort of not really. It's basically that they are becoming more and more political, and they attacked the government this week. And you might say, well, for example, why shouldn't they or whatever? Well, they really shouldn't. They are a charity, and they went for the government. I'm no apologist for the government, I would add, but in a very crude way. It wasn't just sort of like in a constructive way. It was just, you're liars, liars, liars. And this is very much of a piece with the National Trust, with all our institutions, that they are gradually becoming far more politicised. Chris Packham, who's well known for being very political, is one of the vice presidents of the Society for Protection of Birds. But this all centres around the government wanting to loosen controls on environmental restrictions to build houses. As simple as that. So they're going kind of against the government on this. They're entitled to that view, but not as a charity. And this is, I think, alarming people more and more that, in fact, they huge amounts of money now going into charities, and they pay themselves an awful lot. But when you look at all of our institutions and things that we used to be very respected, whether it's Oxfam, whether it's, as I say, the National Trust, they are all becoming political, and it's just not on. It's outrageous.
Nikki, what do you make of this? Because some people watching at home might be donors to the RSPB, might be members of the RSPB. They might be a little bit concerned that the group that they thought that was there to sort of be nice about birds is engaging in student politics.
Well, I think this is a problem with social media, actually, because what's happened is, as charities have had to be online and, putting social media posts out just to compete with the sheer noise of news and information that we have out there, they have taken to being more partisan because it gets more attention. So, you know, as a strategy from a social media perspective, it works because we're talking about it. And, you know, the RSPB obviously been around for lots of years, but it's probably not a charity that I imagine lots of younger people know about or particularly subscribe to. I could be wrong on that, but I'm presuming it tends to be older people that are more invested in it. I do understand what Peter's saying, but I mean, isn't it the case that all charities have always been political? They just haven't been as open about it. I do think this has been driven by social media, the need for being heard and volume and a debate reaching maybe the echelons it didn't before. But maybe they're just more private about it.
Do charities not have a right, though, to be frustrated? I mean, they have actually, it is important to say, they have now apologised for calling ministers liars. But the chief executive has said they are frustrated because there is going to be this plan now to scrap water protection restrictions for housing developments, and they were promised that wasn't going to happen.
The point is, you can't take these kind of cases in isolation. First of all, it's not just about social media. That was an official message put out by them. Whether or not it's on social media is neither here nor there. The fact is that when you look at all of these institutions, right, and indeed, you know, we saw it going back 3 or 4 years, didn't we, during this statue situation. We had, you know, all of these institutions decolonising, calling on this, calling on that, most of them charities, even Kew Gardens. So what I would say is that all of these institutions have been essentially captured. It usually does emanate from the HR department or from the marketing department. And that they tend to be populated by younger people who are absolutely indoctrinated with all of this kind of ideology, because it's exactly the same. They all think along the same lines. It's all anti-conservative. And it's all woke.
And the most weird thing here, the most peculiar element of all of this, is that the RSPB has received millions of pounds from the government.
Yes.
It seems extraordinary. The government is paying campaign groups to campaign against itself.
Yes, exactly. I think that the problem with this really is that all of this adds up to a permanent kind of unelected opposition. You know, and that is the real problem we've got now in this country.
Nikki, I wanted to look at another story in the Telegraph, which is claiming sickness benefits is set to be made much harder. Tell us more.
Well, I feel like we see this headline every few years, actually, the idea that benefits have got to be more difficult to claim because too many people are claiming them and we haven't got enough money to go around. Sickness benefits are really interesting because actually it's to do with the fitness to work test, which was implemented a few years ago. And there was a lot of discussion and a lot of distaste, often from charities and from health officials, sort of saying, actually, the standards that are required to meet this bar are too high. And there are lots of people with complicated illnesses, especially mental health conditions, that are very hard to maybe weigh up against this kind of criteria.
Do you think that there's a chance that of the huge numbers of people who have now claimed to be long-term sick, do you think there's a chance that there is some fraud going on there?
There's always going to be fraud. There's always benefit of fraud. I mean, there is under every single government. The issue is that we have got people that have got often a combination of mental and physical conditions, which are kind of working against each other and making people sicker long term. It is very hard to get people with very severe depression back into work for lots of different reasons. And, you know, one of the things the government has tried to do, or certain campaigners of the government, is kind of buoy up flexible working, because that often very much helps people who are considered long-term sick go back into the workforce. But we really do not understand the interplay between mental and physical health conditions. You know, like the kind of current research now done by the leading psychiatrists and other kinds of doctors say that there kind of really isn't a distinction, and this Cartesian thing of seeing the body and mind separate is really not the way we should be looking at health at all. So actually, most people with long-term sick conditions do have mental health problems, because being very poorly all the time is extremely depressing and debilitating. Yeah.
We're talking about, I think you just might have mentioned, talking about 2.5 million people on long-term sickness benefits. Sorry, I do think that a lot of these afflictions are actually what you might call the ordinary ups and downs of life, which have been pathologized. So now people talk about depression when, for example, they're just feeling a bit down, right?
Well, the culture talks about it. I don't think people's... I think we cannot underestimate the prevalence of mental health conditions. They have absolutely...
2.5 million people in a country. A
country of nearly 70 million.
No. This is of a different order.
We have always had sick people. Actually, what we are better at doing now is recognising them and giving them labels for what they actually have instead of just kind of tossing them off to the wayside and telling them to cope by themselves.
I would say to that, Nikki, that what you've got is a medical profession now, in fact, it goes through society, which just isn't frightened of being judgmental at all to people. So it will never, ever question. You just turn up, I need pills for this, I need pills for...
Honestly, Peter, as someone, I've had lots of psychiatric problems over the course of my life, and it is incredibly difficult to get support. I ended up being sectioned when I had psychosis in Australia because the NHS did not recognise that I was severely mentally unwell for 4 months. It is so difficult, actually, to get the care you need when you are very, very poorly. It is not as simple. Maybe people go to the doctor, but maybe people do go to the doctor and say, I don't feel good, and then we definitely know that antidepressants are being overprescribed, and there's a lot of issues with that. But on the other end of the spectrum, where people are very, very poorly indeed, they do not receive any kind of care that they need.
But the thing is that whatever... these numbers are out of control, and they are not realistic.
But they're
not saying there are not people...
They're going up because people are poorlier.
I'm not saying that there are not people who have, serious depression. There's always been depression, but also there's always been, for example, unhappiness, for example, as well, and all of those things. People now have pathologized.
Well, we're going to have to jump in here, guys. It's been a fascinating discussion and big issues that we've opened up, but that's it. We've run out of time for the show.
Yeah, Nikki, Peter, thank you so much. Britain's Newsroom is back Monday at 9:30, but up next is the Live Desk with Mark Longhurst, who's here to tell us all about it. What's coming up on today's programme, Mark?
Well, it's the concrete catastrophe. How many more schools will have to close? More than 100 shutting immediately because of those structural failings. And just days, of course, before the start of term, Labour and the teaching unions accusing the government of gross negligence. We'll have the latest on the Police Federation chief in Northern Ireland. Will he stay or will he go? And the storm names coming your way.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. A fine day in Scotland, sunny spells here, but showers elsewhere and perhaps some longer spells of rain for a time as a number of weather fronts clear through. They are clearing. Low pressure is disappearing through the rest of the day. High pressure builds for the weekend. For the time being, though, the remnants of some rainfall clearing from the southeast, leaving behind a few showers for England and Wales. Some heavy downpours in places, actually, especially North Wales and then later East Anglia in the southeast. An area of cloud, as well as some patchy rain for Northern Ireland, Northern England and the far south of Scotland. But the lion's share of the sunshine, Northern Scotland, here 18 to 20 Celsius. Low 20s further south, where we do get some sunshine coming through. Feeling quite humid in the south, actually. But any heavy showers do tend to disappear into the evening, most places turning dry overnight. The cloud across central areas sinks south. It tends to